back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz Podcast. Thanks for joining us today as we continue our conversation on lots of things in the Catholic world. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as I always am, by Josh Sullivan. Welcome to you.
Hello.
And Matt Van Milligan. Welcome.
Hello.
Yes. So
I like how enthusiastic you sounded. That
I
time.
was enthusiastic. It's been a while, I guess, since we've been together for a taping of our podcast. I'm just excited to see you.
Oh, that's great.
all.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And there's no false motivation there at all. You
No.
know, that's not, I'm not trying to butter you up for something that's coming up in this episode. But I'm excited to talk about our topic today because we've not addressed this before, I don't think, on our podcast. And it's a question that I get a lot as a vocation director. And it's a real ministry in the church. We're going to be talking about permanent deacons.
Yeah.
Permanent deacons. And there's history to it, obviously. And depends where you live right now in the Catholic world. Maybe you have lots of Catholic deacons in your diocese, in your parish. And depends where you are. Maybe you haven't seen one in a long time or never seen one.
Yeah.
You know, so we're going to sort of talk about what the diaconate is, what deacons do, who are deacons, all that stuff, and if someone feels called to the diaconate, what do they do?
I think this is probably one that a lot of men and women, but a lot of men particularly, because it's a call to them. If they weren't called to the priesthood and everything else, they're always interested, especially if they're very involved in the church, of what exactly this is. I know that when we were talking about it with Matt and with the guys behind the camera, we're all kind of like, oh yeah, this is a really, like, this is something I've pondered. This is something I've really wondered a lot about.
Which is great. It's a vocation in the church,
Yeah.
right? So people are called to the diaconate just like they are to religious life or the priesthood. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And there's a beautiful history to it. And maybe that's where we'll start now. I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
There are two types of deacons. Right off the bat, I just want to clarify that. There is what we call today a transitional deacon and a permanent deacon. And a transitional deacon is someone who is ordained a deacon who will be ordained a priest.
Because we talked about this before, but when you're a seminarian, there are steps to kind of going up lectern, all that kind of stuff, acolyte and stuff, and then going into, then you are ordained a deacon.
That's right.
But the idea is that you're going on to become a priest.
So a deacon receives the sacrament of holy orders. And when I was talking to a group of... what was it? I don't know if it was a group of children for First Communion or whatever it might be. I remember we were talking about the sacraments, how there's 7 sacraments. And I asked, who here has received all 7 sacraments? And the only person who could say that is Deacon Allen.
Yeah.
Deacon Allen in our parish is our parish deacon. He's been married. He's received the sacrament of marriage. He's received the sacrament of holy orders. So a deacon does receive the sacrament of holy orders, right? And in the sacrament of holy orders, you are ordained deacon, a priest, and a bishop. A bishop receives the sacrament of holy orders as well. So it's not just like a promotion. It's an ordination to be a bishop. So there's transitional deacon, which is someone on their way to become a priest. And then there's permanent deacon, which what the title implies, they are a deacon permanently.
Yeah, for life.
And they're not going anywhere. Like their intention is not to be ordained a priest. Although a permanent deacons, if their spouse dies, if they feel called to be ordained a priest, they have that opportunity. If they go through further training and further discernment, if that's their call. So there are 2 types of deacons: transitional. So for example, before I was ordained a priest, I was ordained a deacon. A year before my priestly ordination, I was ordained a deacon. And so I was a deacon for almost a year, about 11 months before I was ordained to the priesthood. And so you'll see transitional deacons training to be priests. So you'll see them in the seminary, maybe on placement in the parish, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But they are moving towards ordination to the priesthood. Permanent deacons you'll see in the parish. They are, for the most part, married, although they don't have to be. They don't have to be married, but they can be married. And their job is, there's a lot to their job. Maybe we'll get into that. But their job is really a role of service to the church.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way back to Acts, the book of the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6. And when there were, remember, the 7 men of good repute that they chose, and they were ordained deacons to serve the church. And at the text in Acts 6 says that they are to serve at the table, which is a really beautiful way of looking at the ministry of the deacon, because the deacon is an assistant to the priest at the Eucharistic table. You'll see the deacon beside the priest. And the deacon's job is really to minister to the people of God as a help to the priest. So the priest obviously can't be everywhere.
Yeah.
And the deacon goes and assists. So he is also visiting the sick. He is also visiting, at the time of the scriptures, was visiting widows and the people who were disadvantaged, right? And calling people to the table, right? To the table of the Lord. And he was just in service to the people of God. Also, the deacon was ordained to be a helper of the bishop. Like it was to be a helper of the bishop. And you still see that in some dioceses today, that deacons who are kind of the right-hand man of the bishop, sometimes they're given an ecclesiastical title. Sometimes they could have a role in the chancery. It was at one point, an archdeacon. Yeah. It could be like the bishop's right hand man sort of thing.
I remember when I was altar serving for Bishop Plouffe.
Right.
So when I was young, and I remember that when a specific deacon used to show up at the Pro Cathedral when I was altar serving, we knew the bishop was going to be there, because this deacon kind of went around, and when the bishop was in town, he was the deacon that served at the mass and made sure that the altar servers knew what they were doing properly and make sure that everybody, what I mean?
Like the bishop's assistant.
Basically. Yeah. But especially though around serving at masses or celebrations of sorts.
And that was his ministry.
Yeah,
right?
that's
that
great.
was his ministry. Now, of the 7 first deacons that they ordained in Acts of the Apostles, the most famous one would be Stephen. We've talked about Stephen, I believe, on another episode, because his feast day is the day after Christmas on December 26th, and he is known pretty much as the first Christian martyr, like the one who died. He was stoned to death
after Jesus' death.
Right, and he was stoned to death, and Paul was present there. Saul was kind of a witness to Stephen's death. So this goes back right to the Acts of the Apostles. And for a while there, like throughout the early church, the tradition was that these deacons had this ministry to aid the priests, to aid the bishops, right? Then, for a while there, Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, that the idea of a deacon, at least a deacon who was permanently a deacon, was kind of went away for a while.
Yeah.
The tradition of the church.
Yeah, the way you said it before, that was Vatican II kind of reestablished the permanent diaconate. Because up until that point, you had what were considered suborders. So you could be kind of a sub-deacon, or you could be... and the idea is that like these would be, what we would now consider as transitional deacons, but some of them would remain deacons for indefinite periods of time. And in Eastern Catholicism, they still retain suborders, but at Vatican II was, in Roman Catholicism, we don't have suborders anymore, and the permanent diaconate was established as kind of reestablished, you would say, as a dedicated ministry.
That's right, and that happened in 1967. Pope Paul VI released a motu proprio. We've seen Pope Francis release motu proprios on things. It's called Sacrum Diaconatus Ordinum, and it's basically general norms for restoring the permanent diaconate in the Latin Church.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's right, like following Vatican II, that this restoration of the permanent deacon came. Now, so what does a deacon do? Okay, so this document by Pope Paul VI lists what a deacon does. Okay, so I'll just name them quickly because I know there's a lot. To assist the bishop and priest during liturgical actions. Okay,
Makes sense. You see them now.
Yeah, that's
the right-hand man of the priest on the altar. Yeah.
To administer baptism.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So they can baptize.
They can baptize. To reserve the Eucharist and distribute it to others. To bring it as viaticum to the dying.
Okay.
Okay. And in the absence of a priest, to assist at and to bless marriages in the name of the church. So he could be the witness to marriages.
Makes sense. So he can marry people in the church.
That's right. He can administer sacramentals and to officiate at funeral and burial services. So obviously these are outside of the context of the Mass, right? Yeah. And to read the sacred books of Scripture to the faithful, to instruct and exhort the people in the scriptures, to preside at the worship and prayers of people when the priest is not present. Okay. To direct the liturgy of the word, in particular when there is an absence of a priest. Okay. To carry out the duties of charity and of administration, as well as social assistance. So you see this, some administrators of parishes or some diocesan offices have deacons who are fulfilling these sort of administrative roles in the chancery, in the diocesan offices. Okay. It says to guide legitimately in the name of the parish priest and of the bishop remote Christian communities.
So I've heard of this. So especially like I lived up in Thunder Bay, and they had some flying communities in Moosonee and Hearst and all that stuff. And sometimes the deacon presided over a Sunday celebration because they wouldn't have mass because they had 3 priests, I think, in one of the dioceses. And so the priest would fly around to the communities once a month, but on other Sundays, the deacon that was living in the community would step up and read the gospel. And, like they do like a small
It's a liturgy of the word. So
exactly.
The priest, when he visits once a month, because we have communities in our own diocese that have that situation. So the priest, when he visits, will consecrate the Eucharist in larger numbers. It will be reserved in the tabernacle, and then on these Sundays, when there is no priest available in these remote communities, the deacon leads a liturgy of the word. So it's still like, he can still lead the opening prayer, and then there's the first reading the psalm, the second reading the gospel. The deacon could give a homily. Yeah. And
the deacon couldn't do the Eucharistic prayer, but because he can't sit. From my understanding, he can do almost like being in ordained holy orders. He can't. One of the few things he can't do that a priest can do, he can't stand in persona Christi.
Yeah, that's
right. And so he can't stand in the person of Christ. So the 2 places that I know of, or maybe 3, if you correct me, but the 2 places I know for sure is during the consecration.
That's right.
And then during confession.
That's right.
And then sacrament of the sick.
So a deacon cannot administer the sacrament of the sick. Only a priest can administer the sacrament of the sick.
Because that's healing, and again in the.
Exactly. And oftentimes confession is part of the sacrament of the sick.
Oh, okay. Right? Yeah, that makes sense. Could he, so not the sacrament of sick, could he potentially, like I know a bishop is the one that normally confirms people, but under special permission, I know that a priest could confirm people,
That's right?
And can a deacon do that in the same, do you know?
I'm not 100% sure, I guess, on that, but I'm going to say no.
Because normally, if the bishop can't do it, like we were talking about COVID times, the bishop couldn't get around to all the churches, especially with all the restrictions and everything else, then the priest could step in and confirm. Yeah. But it's kind of like...
So the priest, the bishop does delegate a priest to, like, confirm. For example, if I had to impart the sacrament of confirmation on someone... outside of the Easter Vigil, I have to get the special permission of the bishop.
That makes sense.
And I've never heard. It's a good question. I've never heard of a deacon given that permission or even able to.
Yeah,
right? But the only thing that I'm doubting is because in our situation, anyways, we have remote communities. Maybe in a remote community,
and under very special circumstances,
the deacon can be given that permission.
I'll have to look that up. We'll figure that out, Matt. That's your job.
So those are what the motu proprio by Pope Paul VI lists as sort of the roles of a deacon. Okay, and I just want to reflect a little bit on during an ordination, because the deacons do receive the sacrament of holy orders. I want to make a distinction because for someone to be a deacon, okay, in Canada anyways, there is an age requirement. And as Canada, in most parts of Canada, the age is between 35 and 60 years old. Some say 65, and some dioceses will make special permission on either side of those. But for the most part, it's 35 to 60 years old. They should already be married, okay, and have been married for a considerable amount of time, like maybe 7 to 10 years or so, to qualify for admission to the sort of formation program. Now, single men who are not married, they'll be required to make a commitment to celibacy.
Yeah.
Okay? And not permitted to marry after they're ordained to the permanent diaconate.
See, I would be wondering. I mean, if God was to call someone to that, I can imagine that happening. But why wouldn't you just look seriously at becoming a priest?
Right.
You're making similar commitments, except you're just not in the ability to act persona Christi. Right. Now, I mean, there might be specific reasons why you couldn't become a priest or whatever, but
sure,
that would be right.
I was in attendance at a diaconate ordination where one of the candidates was a single man who took a promise of celibacy. So the other candidates were married already. They stepped back. This particular candidate stepped forward to make that solemn promise, and then the other promises continued.
Could a transitional deacon and a permanent deacon make their vows at the same time? Like, is it the same celebration? Is it the same for the most part?
Yes, of course they could.
Other than the one,
it could be one celebration. Yes, I've often seen them separate. I've seen permanent deacons ordained in one ceremony, transitional deacons ordained in another ceremony, but there's nothing stopping it, right? So here are the promises a deacon makes, okay? During the ordination, so the elect, those who are candidates for the diaconate, they stand, okay? And they're asked, like, do you resolve to be consecrated for the church's ministry by the laying on of the hands and the gift of the Holy Spirit? So is there an openness? They have to declare that, right? Do you resolve to discharge the office of deacon with humble charity in order to assist the priestly order and to benefit the Christian people?
Humble charity. I like that.
Humble charity. Okay. Do you resolve to hold fast to the mystery of faith with a clear conscience as the apostle urges, and to proclaim this faith in word and deed according to the gospel and the church's tradition?
Cool.
So they're asking for fidelity here to the church. Then those who are preparing to embrace the celibate state make that promise, if that's what they're going to do. Then the next promise is this: do you resolve to maintain and deepen the spirit of prayer that is proper to your way of life? So we can talk with that.
Yeah.
And in keeping with this spirit and what is required of you, to celebrate faithfully the liturgy of the hours with and for the people of God, and indeed for the whole world. You promise that you're going to pray the liturgy of the hours. Now, for those who are listening who don't understand what the liturgy of the hours are, the liturgy of the hours are a type of liturgical prayer that we promise to pray, and by we I mean ordained ministers. There's 5 times a day where we pray, and it's really just praying through the Psalms, right, and some scripture. And so there's 5 times a day where we stop to pray. So the deacons, permanent deacons, they promise to pray that.
No, they promise to pray all 5 times, or is there? Because I've heard other times. Okay, it's morning and evening prayer.
Sure, and this is what for the permanent deacon.
Yeah,
it says in keeping with what is proper to your way of life, and in keeping with the spirit that is required of you. So some deacons will say, "Well, I pray my morning prayer and evening prayer."
Yeah,
right. Whereas I pray 5 times a day.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's...
it's always comforting when we talk about this, and specifically Liturgy of the Hours, is that knowing that priests and deacons specifically, or bishops even for that matter, those people that are preaching the word of God, those people that are speaking on the word, as long as they're faithful to their vows, right? They're praying 5 times a day, or they're praying on a regular basis, and doesn't that just make sense?
Yeah, course.
Like that those people that are preaching and leading God's people, just both obviously in the priesthood, but specifically the diaconate too, is that these people are getting up and preaching the gospel and speaking homily, giving homilies.
Yeah, and there's a cool part at the end of these questions here, where the bishop hands over the book of the Gospels. I'll
talk
say
about that.
Second.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
So and then it says, "Do you resolve to conform your way of life to the example of Christ, of whose body and blood you are ministers at the altar?" So the deacon is also charged with distribution of the Eucharist, right? That's why you see the priest and the deacon distributing the Eucharist at Mass. And then the last question is, do you promise respect and obedience to me and my successors? So
for the bishop,
respect and obedience to the bishop. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So this is the cool part that so the newly ordained deacon. So this, after those promises, the bishop prays the prayer of ordination.
Yep.
Over the deacon after the ordination. So they're vested with their stole and dalmatic. So dalmatic is the name of the the liturgical garment
Yeah.
that the vestment that the deacon wears. Then they go to the bishop. Okay, they kneel before the bishop, and the bishop places the book of the Gospels in the hands of these newly ordained deacons. Okay, and he says this: "Receive the gospel of Christ, whose herald you have become. Believe what you read, teach what you believe, and practice what you teach."
Love it.
It's beautiful.
Great. Yeah.
And then the bishop stands and gives the kiss of peace to each new deacon. But we're entrusting, that's what the deacon's role is, to read the gospel, proclaim the gospel at Mass. And he, of course, has
And live the gospel.
And to
live
live
the gospel. Yeah.
and to preach the gospel. But this year, like, believe what you read, teach what you believe, practice what you teach. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so
We should say that to everyone who's confirmed in the Catholic faith.
You really should. Okay, so then when we're talking about the duties of a deacon, we kind of went through that.
Yeah.
Does a deacon need to be open? Well, maybe open to all of them. Does a deacon have to perform all those duties? So, for instance, what if you're really nervous at like public speaking, or something like that? Like you started to shake when you got in front of people.
Yeah.
Would you be required to read the gospel necessarily?
Well, so I guess we should have mentioned that there is a formation process.
How many? How long is that roughly?
Usually, it's typically 4 years for a deacon, gathering once a month.
Okay.
And so for me, I was in the seminary for 6 years, and that was full time.
Yeah.
For deacons, we acknowledge like deacons should have a career, like should have a life outside of the church, because part of their mission is to witness in the world that they're already existing in, the witnessing in the workplace, in the social circles they have, in the community that they live, right? So they can't go full time to school.
That's right.
So it's usually a 4-year program, gathering once a month. So there's formation there. So there's public speaking training, there's scripture training, there's liturgical training, there's church history, there's canon law, like all those things that you would be trained in. So we're hoping that someone who's tasked with being a herald of the gospel would, through their training, be able to proclaim the gospel.
Makes sense.
Now, preaching is a different story, like giving a homily.
Yeah.
Some might not have the ability to give a homily, right? Like reading the gospel or proclaiming the gospels. If you're going to be a herald of the gospel, I would say you better be comfortable reading the gospel or proclaiming the gospel, or else perhaps maybe discernment from the church is that you maybe are better suited at something else other than a deacon.
So the 4 years, that's part of like the training,
of course.
or
So
the
there's people
discernment.
discerning for you as well. Like you are discerning, you're praying through it, and the church is discerning. So
good.
your formators, your bishop, your, like if there's a diaconate director or vocations director, they're also involved in that, right?
So you're not just. So this is one of the questions that I think I thought about, or that when I had this discussion, a lot of people are like, well, you don't just get to choose to be a deacon,
right?
You like there's both the church deciding, and then you're deciding, like,
and it's not just completing a certain amount of time. It's not like going to high school for 4 years and you graduate,
and now you're a doctor, kind of thing.
Exactly. It's there is more involved. In it.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
makes sense.
So, but I would have, if someone is terribly incapable of proclaiming the gospel, I would have doubts about their.
But like you said, they don't have to give homilies so much.
Sure.
But they do
now,
have
homilies is another thing.
Yeah.
So, people should be well versed to be able to open up the scriptures to people. Like that's a homily. If you're a minister, an ordained minister of the church, you should be able to give a good homily to people that is going to inspire them and let them know. I mean, I don't mean inspire like every homily has to be a wow, but we should be deepening our relationship with Jesus every time we hear a homily, right?
Yeah.
And my homiletics professor in the seminary said that if someone is incapable of giving a homily, like someone just wasn't a good preacher, and we've all heard them, if someone's not a good preacher, that he said that would be something of an impediment to ordination. And what he meant by that was a concern if this man should be ordained.
Interesting.
And I used to think about it. I said, that's kind of harsh, I thought to myself when I first heard it. And then I started to really pray about it and think about it. And I was like, no, I think he's right. If we can't take what we believe and explain it to others, that's like a major part of our vocation.
Yeah.
A major part of our vocation.
Heralds of the gospel.
If we're heralds of the gospel. Because it's it's like the homily is like 10 minutes long or whatever it might be, but if you can't explain the gospel in 10 minutes to a crowd of faithful people, I would have concerns about being able to share the gospel in other ways as well, right? So I thought his words were, even though I thought they were harsh at first, I thought they were good in the end.
When you're discerning the diaconate, I just wonder sometimes too, like, what would somebody be looking at? I remember one time I talked to a priest about this a couple years back, and one of the things that he really said was, he said, look, why do you want to become a deacon? What is it that you want out of the diaconate program? What is it like? Because that kind of tells us where your heart is at, right? And so take away the jobs of the deacon, and would you still become a deacon? And that's what he kind of said. So, like, for instance, sometimes people want to hear themselves preach the homily,
sure,
right? And stuff. So he said, so take that away. If all of a sudden now the church declared that deacons aren't allowed to preach the gospel or not to do a homily, would you still want to be a deacon? If all of a sudden now the church said that you're not allowed to do baptisms or to do weddings or to do, or funerals or whatever, would you still want to be a deacon? And then he said, now, if they took away the opportunity to serve on the altar, would you still want to be a deacon? And so kind of, which was cool for me was when I was looking at it and thinking about it at that time, I wasn't at that age of 35 yet, so I didn't have to worry. Like I knew I couldn't do it, but I was thinking about it at the time.
You're way
myself.
past it now.
Yeah,
right?
I'm way past it now. But at that time, I remember thinking, okay, I don't have to worry about that for a couple of years. But it is something really good, like when you're discerning whether you're going, like if you want to look at that, and while you're discerning, like, what is the reason behind why is your heart being called that way? And for me, I was thinking, oh, wow, yeah. So if I took away the homilies, I wouldn't care about that. Like, you take away you couldn't baptize. For me, it was serving on the altar. That's the draw, which is kind of cool for me. You know what I mean? For me, it's kind of like, oh, that's what I would love. I would love to stand on the altar and be right there, which is kind of cool. Yeah,
and for like a bunch of us who are kind of talking about this and discerning it, and there are parts of it that are attractive, but recognizing first and foremost that it's a call to service.
Yeah.
So that even and again, a lot of the requirements are in the absence of a priest, you can do this.
In the absence.
But there are aspects of it that, like, this is something you're expected to do. Like, you're expected to visit people in prison, widows, like all of those kind of service roles. Yeah. It's not, just if the priest can't do it. You're like, this is actually a core and essential part of your role as a deacon. So exactly what you're saying, that, like, take away the parts that may or may not be attractive. Are you called to the service component of it? Yeah. Because that's, those are the deacons we want.
It's true. And back to that humble service that we were talking about, right? Yeah. And I agree with you, because this is the ministry of the deacon. The ministry of the deacon is humble service to the church, working together with the pastor and the bishop, and finding a suitable way to minister to the people of God. Sometimes it doesn't work out like that. Like, sometimes a deacon is concerned with his own mission. Sometimes a priest doesn't share the mission with the deacon. And we see that kind of happen in situations, right? But to work together, when we're working together as a common mission, like in our parish, we have a deacon who's amazing, who's humble servant of the church, right? And sometimes I would really ask people who are discerning the diaconate, am I ready to be a humble servant? Because, like, am I ready to drop things that are inconvenient for me in order to go visit the sick, in order to do to celebrate a funeral, in order to be there for a baptism? Or am I going to be someone who's going to pick and choose how I want to help the church? I know some deacons who do that, and it's not a good witness for the people of God, and it doesn't help the relationship between the deacon and the pastor, or the deacon and the parishioners, when they pick and choose, and they show up just when they are scheduled to preach, or just when they're scheduled for a baptism. Yeah. It's an encompassing ministry. I also should share that when a man is married, he cannot move forward in the permanent diaconate program without the full consent and acceptance of his wife.
I think you already kind of said that when you said they had to be married for a couple of years. Any guy worth his salt knows.
And in fact,
after 10 years, you can't do anything without the full and free consent of your wife. Is that,
That's right.
And in fact, part of the formation program for a deacon it also involves the wives. So I
That
know,
makes sense.
like in the seminary that I studied at, when they have permanent diaconate weekends, the wives are
Would come
invited
too.
to attend, so that it's the wife is starting to understand what the husband is entering, like what ministry the husband is about to enter. It's different if you were to come home after a weekend of formation and tell your wife about it.
Yes, versus experiencing
If
it
she's
herself.
hearing it, if she's also seen the change in you, or she's challenging you to say, hey,
Yeah.
like by this point, is your heart really there? Like your wife knows you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the wife is involved in the process as well.
I think to myself is I don't know how I do ministry the way I do. Like I do a lot of ministry, but I couldn't possibly do ministry without the support of my wife. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that makes 100% sense to me that your wife would have to be, first of all, on board, but also that it would be something that you would do together as a couple.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
while you are, I'm going to say, the face of the ministry, she's the support behind, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
So, and also, you want to make sure that as a couple, they're a living example of what they're supposed to be in their family life and everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so people have asked, like, should a deacon wear clerical attire,
Collar,
like a
yeah.
Roman collar? And they are permitted to. They don't have to. They don't have to. And they should, if they're going to wear one, they should be ready to clarify that they're not a priest.
That they're
if,
deacon.
if someone says, "Oh, Father, I need you to anoint my,"
Yeah.
they're walking through a hospital room, they need to be quick to be able to correct that. And some would say that it's not appropriate for a deacon to wear the clerical attire, like when he's just out and about, like
Just
at
going for
work,
groceries.
if he's
Yeah.
at work or he's going for groceries.
So the title
or whatever.
diaconate, so like Father Daniele, I call you Father Daniele, whether we're visiting, we're out fishing, we're out wherever we are. I just call you Father Daniele because that's your title, but that's also,
Yeah.
in ministry and everything else. Would someone like, and I call Deacon Al, right?
Yes.
So like I call him, but I see him mostly in ministry roles.
Yes.
Would it be proper for someone to be called deacon? Like if I became a deacon, Deacon Josh at my profession, like I'm a teacher. So like, does that make sense? Or is that a weird thing? Because you're a deacon of the church, but it's not your full-time occupation. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's nothing wrong with
Being
it.
called it? Yeah. Deacon
There,
Jo-
there is a spiritual reality that you were ordained a deacon.
So having people refer to you that way.
Is not, I would say, is it coming from the right place?
Yes.
Is
Good
it
call.
coming
Good
from
call.
like the humble service
Yeah,
that a
yeah.
deacon is called to,
Yeah, for
right? Or is it like, I'm a deacon now, call me Deacon Josh?
Yeah. If you're requiring like the way that some people require you to call a doctor. I'm from the post-secondary education.
Right.
Some people want to be called doctor. Now they've worked towards it and everything else, and I think they deserve it, just like a priest having that title and everything
Yeah.
else. But yes, if they're asking it for a position of authority or position of who they are, then that's different, right?
Yeah, and I think on the other side of that, like
Yeah.
in church circles,
Yes.
I know it's been the practice, at least in the local area that we are,
Yeah.
that people just call deacons by their first name.
Yeah.
Also, people do that with sisters,
Yeah.
religious sisters, and some people try it with priests.
Yeah.
And I know that I've corrected people when they call me by my first name.
They just call you Daniele.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I corrected. I don't think it's appropriate.
No.
And it's not coming from a place of, look at me, call me by my name.
No.
There's a spiritual reality that ordination confers on a person.
Yeah.
And this familiarity is coming from the wrong place. Like, I know locally anyways, when people call me by my first name and don't call me Father,
Yeah.
it's this like, we're all on the same playing field. Like it's this like 1970s
Yeah.
reality of like, we're all the same.
Yeah.
Well, we're not all the same.
Yeah.
Priests, bishops and priests and deacons have been set apart.
And ordained.
That doesn't mean they're better than you.
No.
And by all means, it doesn't mean that. But we've been set apart. Sisters have been set apart. They've given their life to service of the church.
Yeah.
Deacons, priests, bishops have given their life to service of the church. And so we refer to them as the proper title.
We respect them in that
And deacons the same.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, and I think it's a sign of respect from the people of God, and it doesn't take that much of an effort to call someone deacon.
Yeah.
You know, or father or bishop, your excellency, sister. You know, and so that's something I want to say. Also, you might see a deacon's name as Reverend Mr.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That would be like if someone wrote my name, I would have Reverend instead of Father, Reverend. You know, so Reverend Mr. is the correct way
for a deacon,
a formal way of referring to a deacon. But in other ways, just deacon, the title before their name.
Now, so before, I know that just to kind of throw something in the mix, we had, okay, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this one right now, but we had the wives of the deacons. At one time, they played a more prominent role or whatever else the case in the church.
Yeah.
We can't really talk about that right now. We're running out of time, I know. But so right now, those wives, their main role is to support the deacon, right?
Yes. So the wives are an important part of the process of the deacon's formation.
Yeah.
Like I said, you wouldn't want to do something that your wife is totally not
against,
or totally not comfortable with.
They're gonna hold against you when you go out and have to ordain somebody bless somebody who's dying or something.
Especially when the vows and the are represent such a fundamental change. Like it's not just a title.
Yeah.
It's not just something that it's like you're actually reorienting your entire life towards this ministry.
That's right.
So to do that in opposition to your spouse, I can't imagine that working very well.
Exactly.
So you would
and like you said, like you got to get up and go or something like that. You know, the wife has to understand that that's
and
your
support
ministry,
that.
that's your calling. 2 quick questions because we're done.
Yeah.
Does a deacon get paid?
No,
not normally, unless they have like a. I mean, they get stipends for funerals or weddings and things like this. But is there a salary for deacons? Unless they have like a role in the chancery office or something like that warrants a salary. No, it's a ministry of service and charity. And if people are discerning being a deacon, where do they go? Well, I would say to talk to your vocations director in your diocese or the bishop's office, whatever. Whatever is the situation in the diocese that people are listening from. So if there's any other questions that we haven't answered on the permanent diaconate, this is a fruitful conversation, I thought. I don't know. And if people are thinking about serving the church as a deacon, pray about it. Start praying about it. Talk to your vocations director and see if the Lord is calling you to this beautiful ministry. I really enjoyed my year as a deacon, and I'm still a deacon. I was ordained a deacon. That doesn't go away.
No.
When I'm a priest, I carry that humble service into my priesthood. Right?
That's cool.
If you have any questions about the permanent diaconate or anything to add to the conversation, drop us a line at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com or leave a comment on our Facebook or Instagram pages. So that's all the time we got today. For Josh Sullivan and Deacon Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.